Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be making a large fanny pack day pack. And this is an awesome sewing project. It's a really big oversized fanny pack that almost acts as a backpack. All in all, this fanny pack is a great size for the beach, the gym, or just a bag to take to work. And this project is for all skill levels. Hopefully I can walk you through and teach you tricks and tips along the way that you can utilize in all your sewing projects. So if you're new to the channel, grab that printable pattern and let's get started. Getting started with supplies, you're going to want to grab 1 yard for your main fabric, and I recommend a canvas, denim, twill, or any heavier weight fabric. These are all nice durable fabrics that will give you a quality end product. You'll need 1 yard for your secondary fabric, and this is going to be your lining. I recommend a lighter weight cotton or polyester. Pretty much any lighter weight fabric will work perfect. You'll need 2 zippers, one 24-inch and one 16-inch, and I'm going to be using a metal zipper. You can use metal or plastic. I'm actually going to be using 2 24-inch zippers because we're going to be snipping the ends. So if you can't find a 16-inch, it's totally fine just to grab 2 24-inch. You'll need 1 yard of webbing, and I'm using 1.5-inch width webbing. I like how the wider webbing lays on you. You can go up to 2-inch or down to 1-inch. It's totally up to you and the style you're going for. You'll also need 1 buckle and 1 slide adjuster, and this is also based on the width of your webbing. So whatever width webbing you grab, make sure you grab the same width buckle and strap adjuster. You'll need 1 snap button closure, and you can use magnetic or regular. I'm going to be using magnetic. They're super easy to install without any tools, and also very convenient getting in and out of the pocket. But feel free to use whatever closure that goes along with your style. You'll need 2 zipper pulls, and zipper pulls come in all different style. You don't need the zipper pulls, but it's a nice little touch and detail that's really going to take your bag to that professional level. And I'll have links down below to all the supplies. Lastly, you're going to need your pattern. This pattern is available at properfitclothing.com. It's super easy to use. All you have to do is print it out, tape it together, and you're ready to go. And the pattern also comes with a list of supplies if you're struggling to find anything, and all you have to do is scan the QR code and it'll take you to the supply. After you printed out the pattern and you're putting it together, I recommend cutting out the top and the side edges. This is going to allow you to overlap the pattern super easily for a more square pattern. And after taping your pattern together, it should look like this. And if you're having troubles lining up the pattern, be sure to check your printer alignment. This is a quick and easy fix to get your pattern printing perfectly. After cutting, you should end up with 1 zipper cover panel cut out of your main fabric, 2 bottom panels, 1 cut out of your main fabric and 1 cut out of your lining, 2 top pocket panels, 1 cut out of your main fabric and 1 cut out of your lining, 2 front pocket flat panels, both cut out of your main fabric, 2 front side panels, both cut out of your main fabric, 1 front pocket panel cut out of your main fabric, 2 front panels, 1 cut out of your main fabric and 1 cut out of your lining, 3 back panels, 1 cut out of your main fabric and 2 cut out of your lining, and lastly 4 zipper end panels, 2 cut out of your main fabric and 2 cut out of your lining. Moving on to construction, grab your front pocket panel, and we're going to start by marking the hem guides on both sides. Use a ruler for the best results, and then go ahead and mark the centers. Roll the hem guides over twice to create a nice clean edge. And before we sew, we're going to press that edge down really quick, and repeat this process for the opposite side. Once both sides are pressed, we're going to stitch at 1/4 inch to that edge. After stitching, we're going to grab the pattern piece one more time and mark the centers on both the hemmed edges. Grab the main fabric front panel, and we're going to mark the pocket placement guides and the centers. Using the guides, we're going to place the pocket within the marked areas. When you have it decently lined up, we're going to stitch around the top edge, the side edge, and the bottom edge, leaving the left edge open. This stitch is just to hold the pocket into position, so don't go too far in on the stitch. The left side is going to be the opening for our pocket. Grab both the front pocket flat panels, place the right sides together, and stitch around the outside edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance, leaving the top edge open. We're going to use that top edge to flip the right sides back out. After stitching, notch the curved corners to reduce some of that bulk. This will help define that corner once it's flipped out. After notching, flip the right sides out. Before top stitching the edge, I recommend pressing it, and after pressing, we're going to add a top stitch to that edge. I'm going to be using an edge presser foot. This is going to help guide me along the edge and give me a nice straight stitch. These are awesome to use on the stitches that are going to be right out on the front, easy for the eye to see. Also, another good tip is matching your thread to your fabric. And before we can add this onto the panel, we're going to add our magnetic snap. You can use magnetic or regular, but I'm going to be using magnetic, so grab the thinner side, and you can add this to either side. Just make sure you line it up in the center. Mark and snip your side, feed the magnet into position, place the back on, and bend the sides. I like bending mine towards the outside, but you can go either way. Before we place the other half of the magnet snap, we're going to place the pocket into position along the open edge of the front pocket. I like to place it about 1/4 inch away from the pocket opening, and then we're going to stitch as close as we can to the flap edge. To hide that raw edge, we're going to flip the flap down and top stitch along the top edge. And the further you go towards that curved edge, the more it's going to hide the raw edge underneath. As you can see, mine's exposed just a little bit, but I'm going to trim that up and I'm cool with it. Another quick technique would to be serging that edge before sewing it on. With the pocket into position, we can place the other magnetic half of the snap, firstly where the pocket snap falls, and mark that position. And go ahead and install it the same way. If you're working with very fraying fabric, use a fabric glue along the snipped opening. This will help tame that fabric just a little bit and prevent more fraying. It will also help keep your openings from getting any bigger. After installing the bottom half, go ahead and snap it into position and see if everything lines up correctly. From here, we're going to grab the front panel lining and place it behind the main fabric with wrong sides together. Just like the front pocket, we're going to stitch around the outside edge, securing these panels together. And I'm using a serger. This cuts and sews at the same time and cleans that edge up. This is a great machine to use to prevent fraying. But if you don't have a serger, it's no big deal. Just use a straight stitch and get as close to that edge as possible. And by securing these two layers together, it's really going to help later on when sewing everything together. Moving on, grab the back panels, and we're going to repeat the same process. Place the main fabric and lining wrong sides together and stitch around the outside edge, and then we're going to do the same thing, just stitch around the outside edge of one lining panel. And another good reason to use a serger is that way both of these panels, when they're together and you're stitching, it's going to be cutting off the sides so it makes them perfectly symmetrical. And I'm just doing this to the single lining panel to prevent fraying. By doing this technique, you'll be able to skip bias tape later if you choose to do that. Since we're in the serging mood, we're going to do the same thing for the top pocket panel and the bottom panel. Place the main fabric and lining wrong sides together and stitch around the outside edge. This is one of those steps where you might as well just get it all done at once so you can just move on to construction. Again, if you don't have a serger, just use a regular straight stitch as close as you can to the outside edge. And once you have everything stitched together, you can go ahead and move the top pocket panel off to the side and focus on the bottom panel. Start by marking the centers on both top and bottom. Do the same for the front panel, and a good way to do this after sewing it on is just fold it in half to make sure you have the exact centers. Place the curved side of the bottom panel on the bottom edge of the front panel with right sides together. And we're going to stitch from the center out in both directions so that way we have it perfectly square. I like to do this technique when you really want everything to line up because there's a lot of pressure with this many layers, and the feed dog is going to pull the bottom faster than the top, causing it to go unaligned. And the next step, we're going to be adding bias tape to that edge, and I'm going to run you through a few different methods. The first method is using a bias tape making kit. This kit allows you to make your own bias tape, and it comes with a bunch of different sizes and presser foot, and all you have to do is cut out your bias tape strip, feed it through your folder, and press it on the opposite side. It's super simple, and it gives you the chance to pick the size bias tape you want and also match it with your fabric. The second option is using a bias tape attachment, and these come in different styles and sizes as well. This will allow you to sew the bias tape directly onto your garment. It's a very fast and effective technique. The last step is using pre-made bias tape. This is bias tape you buy already folded, and you simply wrap it around your seam and sew it on. And this is installed the same way as the first method. And like I said before, if you did serge these edges, you can skip this step. Adding bias tape is going to give more strength to the bag and overall make it more professional. And using the bias tape binder really speeds up the process. But it's up to you if you want to do this step. So flip the right sides out, and we're going to add a top stitch to that bottom edge. Fold the seam allowance towards the bottom edge, and I'm going to be using the edge presser foot to really get a nice neat stitch. And the stitch can be pretty bulky, so just take your time and go slow. It's well worth it. It's going to add a nice look and extra strength along that bottom edge. Moving on, grab one zipper, and we're going to mark it at exactly 15 inches. Grab the zipper end panels, and we're going to place the right sides together for the main fabric and the wrong side of the zipper to the right side of the lining. Repeat this process on the opposite end of your zipper. Before we start stitching, we're going to move the zipper train to the inside of the 15-inch area. And stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just go slow over that zipper to avoid breaking a needle. Before we snip the zipper, we're going to fold the flaps towards the outside and add a top stitch. And do the exact same for the opposite side. This top stitch is going to give us a little bit more strength over that zipper track. And finally, you can snip the zipper ends flush with the panel. and your top zipper is ready to install. So grab your back panel lining and your top pocket panel. Mark the centers on everything, and it's always good to just fold it and double check the centers. Place the wrong side of the top pocket panel on the right side of the lining. Place the right side of the zipper on the right side of the top pocket panel and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance on that zipper. And I'm just using a regular presser foot to install it. You can use a zipper foot if that works better for you. Fold the zipper back to make sure you got all the layers. And the next step is adding bias tape to that zipper edge. And the bias tape is going to go from one end panel to the other end panel. Avoiding the lining edges, flip the zipper flat and add a top stitch along the inside seam. This is another top stitch that it gets very bulky, so just take your time and use a heavier weight needle if you have one. And this top stitch really helps flatten out that top pocket panel. Moving on, grab the zipper cover panel. Fold it in half with the wrong sides together and press it as good as possible. Before we top stitch, we're going to serge all the raw edges just to neaten it up a bit. And from here, we're going to add a top stitch along the folded edge as close as we can to that edge. And you can add 1 or 2 stitches depending on what look you're going for. With that complete zipper cover panel, we're going to move it over to our top pocket panel and stitch it along the edge. Start it right at the center of the zipper end panels and work it all the way around to the opposite zipper end panel. It's going to be stitched at a 1/4 inch seam allowance or just on the inside of your serge. And you really want to make sure this is centered, so I would just run it along that edge a couple of times and pin it down. Flip the right side out and just make sure all the layers got stitched together and both of the ends are lined up correctly. Grab the opposite zipper and we're going to line it up the same exact way, center on that top pocket panel. Once it's lined up, we're going to follow the same stitch path as the cover panel, which will be a 1/4 inch seam allowance. At this point, you can use your zipper foot if you want to, or just use a regular presser foot. After finishing it up, grab your completed front panel, mark all the centers, and we're going to line it up on the top edge of that front panel. And a good way to make sure it's centered is to use those cover panel ends and line them up with the top of that front panel. And it's always best to walk that zipper along the edge before you sew to make sure it's the correct length. Once you're satisfied, throw a few pins in and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance along that zipper edge. And this is another one you can use the center out technique to really ensure it turns out square. And like always, after stitching, flip the right sides out to make sure all the layers are nice and neatly sewn together. And to complete this edge, add bias tape to both of those seams. But like I said previously, if you did serge these, you can go ahead and skip the bias tape step. Moving on to top stitching the front panel, fold the seam allowance towards the bottom edge and add your top stitch. I use 2 different colors on my front panel, so it's going to make it a little bit more tricky to add my top stitch. I could go all the way straight across with one color, but I wanted to match the thread to the colors, so I did the outside colors first, and then I went back and stitched the center. This does take a little bit more time, but in the end it looks really nice. But if you used all one color, you don't have to worry about this. Grab both the front side panels, and we're going to place them on the sides with right sides together. Line the top up with the bottom of the end panel and stitch at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You will be stitching over the zipper track, so just take your time. When sewing the side with the zipper train, be sure to move it down to the inside before you start stitching. And be sure to pin those zipper tracks together nice and tight. And just like earlier, before we trim the zipper ends, we're going to flip the side panels up and add a top stitch. This area can get pretty bulky and going over that zipper can be pretty hard, so use a heavier weight needle and take your time. And after finishing the top stitch, go ahead and snip the zipper ends flush with the side panel. And before we added that top stitch, we could have added bias tape. This would have added more strength and less raw edges to deal with. Moving on to the strap assembly, grab your webbing, buckle, and strap adjuster. From your 1 yard of webbing, cut about a 7 to 8 inch strip, leaving you 2 pieces. Grab the strap slide adjuster and place it on the longer end of your webbing. Slide it down about 14 to 18 inches. Grab your buckle. We're going to be using the side with the 2 bars. We're going to feed the webbing through the bottom of the inside opening and back down through the outside opening. Pull the end out about 8 inches and we're going to slide it back through that strap adjuster. Give yourself a little slack in the slide and it will go through easily. And the last thing we're going to do is roll that end over twice and add a stitch. If you're using a nylon webbing, use a lighter to clean up that cut edge. Grab the opposite end of the buckle and strap, feed it through the opening from top to bottom, fold the webbing end over twice and add your stitch. And I like to prepare both these before I start stitching, and when you're stitching, you can add more than one stitch or you can do different techniques like a box stitch or an X stitch. Pretty much the more stitches you add, the stronger these straps will be in the long run. After completing your strap assembly, grab your back panel, the one with the main panel and the lining sewed together, and we're going to place them on the top edges. Line both the webbing ends up in the corners with right sides together, and I like to let the webbing hang over about 1/4 inch, and stitch as close as you can to the outside edge of that back panel. With the strap secured down, mark the centers of your back panel assembly and your front panel assembly. And this is where it can get a little bit tricky. We're going to place the right sides together, lining up the centers. Line up all the layers, including that back lining panel we sewed into the zipper, and we're going to pin all the way around the outside edge. You may end up with a little bit of grace on the sides, but that's totally fine. Just try to stay on that lining panel and sew all the way around the outside edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance. And if you do end up with a little bit of that grace on the edges, that has to do with that lining panel being caught a little bit on the inside of that bias tape, or it got folded into the top stitch a little bit too much. But it's really not that big of a deal because that lining back panel is still going to do its job and act as a divider for the pockets. And to seal it all off, add your bias tape. But before adding it, it's best to flip the right sides out to make sure all the layers got sewn together. And we're getting pretty close to the end. The next step, we're going to add some tack stitches along the straps, and this is where we're going to overlap that strap on the inside that we left about 1/4 inch. And that's just going to give us a little bit more strength for a longer lasting bag. Like the straps, you can do a box stitch, an X stitch, or whatever type of stitch you would like. Lastly, we're going to add our zipper pulls. This is going to be a nice little detail. So just feed one end through the zipper opening and then the pull back through itself. Super easy to do and adds a lot of character to your bag, also making it really easy to open the zippers. Do one more once over to make sure everything is looking good, add your branding, and you're all set to go. And there you have it, your large fanny pack day pack is complete. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. I hope you had a ton of fun with this project and you picked up some new skills that you can use in all of your sewing projects. Like always, if you have any questions about the pattern or the construction, definitely comment down below or send us a message on our website. And do the same if you have any ideas on stuff you'd like us to make. But I'm gonna keep the videos coming at you, so I'll see you next time.